Hey, Chris, another exciting day where we get to talk about auctions. How you doing?
Hi, Ron. Very excited to dive in today. This is going to be an interesting one. We're going to be talking about something that's going to be near and dear to a lot of folks who are watching. Going to be digging into really big purchases and large shipments. And this is a nuance that a lot of folks will find particularly relevant. And I'm looking forward to diving into it today with you.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
So just to get us started, I think probably one of the biggest things that happens with auctions, especially, big purchase auctions or large shipments, is there really are some very specific steps that have to happen depending on the type of transaction that we're dealing with. And this can be based on multiple factors. Number one, where physically are the buyer and the seller located? And this is kind of a starting place, right? So
Yeah,
usually we want to be able to, kind of think about this and kind of pre-qualify up front, and make sure that there's going to be a good fit just with a physical location. And then we also want to look at just overall pre-qualification, of the actual buyer to make sure that they have the ability to complete the transaction. So generally speaking, I would say this is going to be a big opportunity to be able to kind of validate upfront, provide that governance that we've talked about a lot in these series, and just kind of like pre-qualify the experience, if you will, so that folks know what to expect, both from the buyer and the seller side. And so I think if we wanted to, we could kind of talk about this and how it applies with large purchases first, if that sounds good.
yeah. No, that makes sense. And the thing is everything that we're going to talk about today, although we're talking about big purchases and large shipments, even if your auction deals with small stuff, it's going to be very applicable. You never know if a seller decides on your auction site to all of a sudden put something larger, and you have the appropriate shipping and governance and payments and verifications in place. What happens if you want to grow the business? What happens if your business starts becoming more successful and you haven't made the plans to be able to scale that way? So, yes, it's very important. So, even if you're not planning on selling $1 million homes today, this is going to be a great one for you.
Here, here. Totally agree. And so one of the things that's really interesting about auctions in general is just the idea that you do have to get enough traction, and a lot of traffic essentially within an auction to make it effective. So one of the challenges with large payments can be that we need to set this up so that it can be self-service and enable this kind of scalability of the number of auctions and the ability for users to follow governance that works, that's intelligent, and allows them to complete the process successfully and kind of have the system solve some of the typical challenges and then have capability to inject if needed, an escalatory workflow that can include manual overrides, etc. But generally lean on having the system handle everything with governance. And whenever you're dealing with large purchases, these governance rules are going to be significantly different than they would for small purchases. Typically, typically it's going to be significantly different. And so, just to kind of go into some of these areas that make sense to evaluate as a business whenever you're looking at your auction platform, I would say probably one of the most important things is just verification of the buyer, being able to make sure that they actually have the ability to make a large purchase. So, generally speaking, this can include things like having them go through and provide documentation. And depending on what kind of purchase it is, you can really set the tone based on your industry. So, if you haven't already, and you probably have significantly, you want to see what is best practice within your industry, because this is probably what a lot of the buyers are going to be expecting anyway. So if all of the other auction sites and auction experiences that they're going through for a large purchase of a collector item, maybe it's art, maybe it's jewelry, maybe it's an automobile, a rare item, um, they may have to provide bank statements or financial statements or a deposit or an escrow. and they may have to actually get pre-approved if it's a house. They may have to, go through a pretty detailed process, regardless of the kind of challenge or overhead. They may already be used to that. And so then the question becomes, after you determine what is standard within your industry, how can you automate as much of this as possible? And this is really where we like to come in. In addition to helping you kind of think about what's standard in your industry and what you can do that is going to provide more assurances, there are also a lot of automation tools and very successful integrations that we can conduct and we can kind of reference that we've completed in the past, that you should be able to take advantage of. So, Ron, I'd love to turn it over to you to kind of talk about some of these ideas, some of the concepts that we've implemented in the past, like our escrow and pre-qualification steps, maybe looking at a credit check, things like this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, we've done a couple of them where, um, you know, you think about it, like you said, the pre-approval process. When I go to buy a house, a lot of times I can't even walk through the house and see the house without a pre-approval, right? Especially in the competitive market now. I've noticed where that's been a change where, earlier buying a house, you didn't have to have a pre-approval to walk through and see the home, but now they're requiring that. So that is, especially when you're online and you can't be in person, you got to think through that whole process. So, do you have the ability when they register to automatically require them to upload their bank pre-approval to show that they've already been pre-approved for the loan? And then typically the next step when you buy the house is you have to pay the $10,000 or the $5,000 for the earnest money, right? And that'll give you 5 to 10 days so that you can get your inspection done. So, do you have to go through that? And then potentially the inspection fails. So, maybe one of the things you do to help with the online process is you changed it up a little bit where the seller now is required to provide um, a third party inspection notice. And you still get the chance to do your own inspection, but maybe one of the things that they do is they require an inspection to be done within the last 30 days and submitted by the seller, right? And that could be something that's automated. Some of the tools that you're talking about that we've done, one of them was called Factor Trust, where they didn't want everybody that went in to buy and bid to hit their credit, right? Because every time you do a credit score, if you do a hard hit, it's a 5-point hit, right? And everybody doesn't want to do that if they're just going to bid. That's kind of silly. So you can do what they call a soft hit. You can also do some other things like Factor Trust would go in, and as you signed up, it would take things like it could validate your job, it could validate your address. If you put your home address, it could validate whether you're the one that's on the lease or on the mortgage. It could validate a bank. You could put your bank credentials in there. It could validate your bank, and it could come back and give you kind of the equivalent of a credit score, but it's more, they call it a trust score, and it doesn't actually hit your credit. So there's third-party APIs for that. There's third-party APIs we talked about in a previous chapter when we talked about escrow, right? There's different payment forms where with Payoneer or escrow.com, where funds can be uploaded into escrow and released. It's almost like, as a development shop, we talk about milestones, right? Well, your process has different milestone. One milestone, the first milestone is kind of getting verified to bid. The next milestone might be winning the auction. The next milestone might be your earnest money. And the next milestone might be getting through the inspection. And then the next one might be the delivery of the goods, right? Or the shipment of the goods. And so certain funds are released on shipment. Before you're going to ship, you want to make sure that, especially let's say it was $1 million piece of jewelry, you want to make sure that you've received, 250,000 before you even ship the item to know that they've got the money. So those funds are released. And then when it's shipped and it's received, do they just take it and run? Or do you have another governance process that says it's received by a third party in the city where they have to drive and pick it up upon signature and put in their ID. And so this third party receives it, does an inspection, and they're the ones that say, yes, it is in the condition that it was. It's exactly as done. It's approved. And as soon as they come and look at it, if they take the item, then that third party puts in that the funds are, released to the seller to try to protect everybody. So you have to kind of think through the entire scenario of the different things that you're doing. And there might be different APIs that are needed for the different types of auctions in the verification process.
Exactly. And, one of the interesting things about, just for example, escrow based payments is there are a lot of different vendors. We've worked with, of course, Payoneer. There are companies like Escrow. You have Trust.io, Rapid, Paybase, and the list goes on. So, how are you going to select between these different vendors, and what are some of the questions that you're going to ask in order to determine, what makes sense for your particular business? And this is something that we recommend. Ultimately, you get into the details and understand the transactional costs. A lot of escrow based payments, for example, can be quite expensive. They charge a premium to deal with this kind of escrow type of model. So, does it make sense to do that? Or does it make sense to have a kind of workflow that you run internally and essentially set up some kind of internal, escrow model? And these are opportunities that you can determine, what makes the most sense, what makes sense for your end users, what's going to work for your scenario. But ultimately, these are really big opportunities and potentially big problems that you'll need to identify and address in order to be able to scale and take that market leadership position or continue to own that position if you're already in it within your niche. And so this is kind of fundamental and part and parcel with the winners within niche marketplace and auction based arenas. And one of the interesting things too, Ron, is I think a lot of people don't know this, but 67% of all online commerce goes through marketplaces, and many of those marketplaces are auction based. And I think this is just an interesting piece of data. And this is something that, it's really a lot of the most dominant sites as far as traffic and revenue processing through them follow this marketplace type of model and auction type of model where buyers and sellers can meet and they can interact. And so fundamentally, being able to get to that type of scale and that type of niche ownership, you do really want to think through 3 to 5 years down the road and allow yourself to think big. Allow yourself to think, what is the owner of this niche? What is the kind of dominant player going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And then ask yourself what you're doing to make your team, your company that dominant player. Somebody has to be the best. It might as well be you. And,
Right.
let's figure that out together. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You certainly don't achieve that by not, I mean, maybe you do, but how rare is it that you just fail into becoming the best, right?
Right.
Very few people fail into that. It takes a significant amount of effort and planning. And the next part that we're going to talk about, the mediation and the resolution process, is probably a big part of that. If nothing else, this is the one you really need to think through because you don't certainly want to be stuck with the liability um, of different things. I mean, we're not talking about auction on this specific example, but like with Amazon, if I buy something with Amazon Prime and I don't like it and I get it, I just send it back to Amazon, and I don't even have to worry about governance. I don't have to deal with the seller. But if I buy it on eBay, on the other hand, I do, right? I get the item and I'm not happy with the item. I can't just send it back to eBay. eBay never send it to me. So when you're dealing with auction sites, it's a very different experience for buying. And so it's very important to go through and decide what does that mediation resolution look like. So let's talk just about the first part about, issue resolution. Do you want to become a part of that at all? Right? Do you want to be the intermediate arbiter? Do you have a third party arbitration process? Do you have a mediation process? Do you force them to just sign an agreement when they sign up to bid or sell that they will go through mediation and arbitration and you just pick who that company is? Um, or do you force them to go through something before litigation can happen? Do you even want to become involved? Right? I mean, that's a big one. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think fundamentally what what you tend to see is as the business scales, it makes sense to own more and more of the process as kind of a vertical and a horizontal integration, if you will, and really being able to kind of vertically integrate those pieces into your business over time is going to tend toward being the most optimal for the value delivery with your customers, both on the buyer and the seller side. So then the question is, how can you get to this kind of point where you have enough scale that it makes sense to do that? And really, the best thing to do is essentially build a kind of backlog or a prioritized kind of set of objectives with this mediation and issue resolution piece, probably starting as a relatively manual process and a relatively kind of simple process that becomes more sophisticated over time. Sorry, we had a unannounced guest join us. You have your monster truck? Sorry, I can kind of
That's
mute
so
if you want
awesome.
to hammer there. Sorry, man.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Like you said, thinking through it, even if you have to do some of the manual stuff up front, where you might even become part of the arbiter yourself, where people can submit their issues and complaints on both sides, and then you can issue the ruling. And maybe part of the governance just says that you'll be the intermediate, and your decisions are final, and they have to agree if they want to sell through you. And then as and maybe it's the other way around. I know people that sell through Amazon. Right now, a lot of the sites that we're building for people, they're moving away from Amazon, right? Amazon gave them a lot of exposure and a lot of volume, but because they shipped through Amazon, Amazon was taking like 30 or 40%. I don't remember. I thought it was like 30%. And so they were
It
like
varies. It goes up to 40+% for some categories. Yeah.
40%, right? Yeah. And so if it's up to 40%, I mean, that's, sometimes the items that you're selling, your margins aren't even there for 40%, right? Giving that up to Amazon. So a lot of people are doing their own thing, but maybe they started with Amazon so they could go global and get lots of volume and only make a few percent. And that's how they made their money. But now that they've made their money, they're able to afford at least a garage. Now they can at least start stocking items up and selling it themselves. So that's kind of the same thing here, where you may start some of these processes manually, or you do the reverse. You may go find a mediator, like with escrow payments, for example. I think the last time we used Payoneer, most of the cut was like 15%. And I remember some people, when we were starting to set these up, they would say, well, we're not going to use American Express or PayPal because it's 4%. And they were freaking out that MasterCard Visa was 3%, and to pay a whole 1% more for PayPal uh, or Discover was 4%. They wouldn't do it. They didn't want to lose the 1%. Well, with escrow payments, that takes 15%. So maybe you start there, and that at least gets you into the ability to sell $1 million properties and jewelry and expensive art and things like that. But as you start having more money, maybe you bring that process in house, so you become the bank and you start charging the fund. And maybe it's you just charge 10%, so it's a lot cheaper. And so one of the reasons they come and sell through you is because you have a cheaper process, where other sites that are still using some of the other escrow payment APIs, if they're charging 15%, maybe one of your competitive advantages that you market is you only charge 10, right? Because you've been able to bring that in house. So we really need to think through how we're going to handle the payment and receipt of these expensive items and all the different steps to understanding where different issues might arise. Do we force them to, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide here, do we force them to use a particular shipping company because they're the only ones that will warrant the shipment and take any responsibility there, right? So shipping is going to be another one. So we've talked about the arbiter. That can be a third party, or you can set up something for your team internally to handle it. Most of the time, there's not going to be issues. I mean, there's going to be a lot of different auctions. And once you start getting to volume and have a lot of auctions, the likelihood of there being problems both goes up and goes down. As a percentage, it's going to go down, but the likelihood that it's going to happen, even if it's only 1%, well, if you have 100 auctions, it's going to happen once. But if you have 1,000 auctions, you might have 10 a day. right? So you have to start thinking through, as Chris mentioned, he always talks about the 3 to 5 year plan. And I love that, right? What happens if this happens in 3 to 5 years? If I plan for that and it accidentally happens in 2 weeks, right? I mean, we've all heard about viral videos, right? Well, what happens if your auction site becomes virally successful and you haven't planned for that success? Does it then fall on its face? We have a lot of problems and it's catastrophic to the point where everybody went, oh, that site is crap, and they leave and they don't come back, right? A lot of times the cliche, you have one chance to make a first good impression. So think through that, start smart, think through all the different mediation resolution processes, write down all the governance and policies, and make that plan. Even if we can't afford all of it up front and we have to do some of those processes manually, let's at least plan for success. So let's move on now to the next one and let's start talking about shipments, because shipments is a big one. Do you want to kick us off on shipments?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things about shipments, and great job talking about the escrow piece and some of the mediation. I think that's a great way to explain it. The same thing really applies significantly to shipping overall, is that, this is a complex area depending on what the categories are, what the niche focus areas are. Of course, if we're dealing with something like automobiles, or maybe container shipments, for example, is one that we see quite a bit. Intermodal shipments, it could just be LTL shipments even, but something that's rather challenging to ship relative to just kind of a UPS and FedEx and DHL or etc. type of integration, maybe more complex. Well, this similar to the payment side of things, it makes a lot of sense to think 3 to 5 years out. And it also makes a lot of sense to investigate some of the competitors and see what they're doing that's working. This is a huge opportunity whenever you think about where you want to go over time. If you're in a position where you can, again, make it easy for the users, provide a lot of value, and make it self-service, then this can be a kill point. This can be an opportunity where you win, where everyone else in your space just can't touch you. And so that's really how we want to encourage you to think about it with shipments. Now, with regards to shipping, a lot of our customers who haven't worked with us before, they're engaging with us the first time. What we find is that they don't know that there are logistics companies that have really nice APIs that tie into most, if not all, of the LTL shippers, a lot of intermodal shipping opportunities, even literal freight shipments with boats and trains. I mean, these can be significantly automated with getting quotes and getting lead times and actual shipping information to present via the API to the end user in an automated fashion. For a lot of folks that are typically shipping heavy equipment or large purchases of, different physical equipment, these types of things, they're probably used to doing manual shipping quotes. And this being, a pretty
Yeah.
significant overhead, right? So somebody wins an
Yep.
auction and they go to complete the process, and then someone from the auction team has to get involved. And Ron, you were talking about, cars that whenever you were working with the Barrett Jackson kind of bidding process, and they would have a couple of shippers, or you could purchase and have your own shipping, but that those were kind of the options. And ultimately, this idea of having several options within the site, and then possibly providing the buyer the opportunity to be able to conduct the shipping, and or the seller, depending on your space. I mean, these are opportunities that you probably want to evaluate and think about what the pros and cons are. So just to kind of throw a few cons out there, if we allow the seller to fulfill the shipping directly, and there may be scenarios where they're just kind of paying for that and including options, you could get a varying level of service and varying level of support, and possibly different levels of insurance coverage, or ability to kind of stand behind that shipping. If one seller uses one shipping provider that just doesn't do a great job, another seller uses a completely different one that's first class. How do you guarantee this kind of governance or this standard kind of opinionated stance within your platform that guarantees that users are going to be able to trust that there is a certain standard that they're going to get when they're on your auction site? And to me, that's really part and parcel with the niche owners, is this idea subconsciously that whenever I'm buying on this site, I know I can trust I'm going to get XYZ outcome. I know at least this is going to work. I may not get the best price in the world, or maybe I am getting the best price, but I know that the shipment is going to arrive and I'm going to be able to use the items. They're not going to be broken or significantly damaged without a resolution. And I'm just curious if you want to kind of talk a little bit, Ron, about some of the pros and cons that you've seen as well, with having these different scenarios, setting up these different scenarios with different shipping providers.
Yeah. It also depends on where the items are. Some people, you may have this, let's say you come to us and you have us do an auction site for you, but you do estate sales. Well, a lot of time with an estate sale, they'll bring you all the items, you'll house the items, and you might have a brick and mortar and an online. So now all of a sudden, as each of these items sell and they have to be shipped out, if your team's the one packing up and shipping these, could you imagine if you allowed the seller to deal with shipping and you had 27 different shipping companies trying to show up and pick up one item each? There's no way you could do it, right? So you would have to handle the logistics. And so now that would be something in the governance. So just where the items are being shipped and who handles the logistics. And that's why Chris mentioned kind of these logistics companies, sometimes they're called 3PLs, handle all the logistics and shipping, especially when it comes to like these intermodal. And Chris, I think what you're leaning towards that we deal with is international, right? Because all of a sudden it's really easy for a bidder and a seller to come up and register, go through the verification process. But then what happens if the bidder that wins is in France? All of a sudden, now I'm not just shipping across the street to you. I'm literally dealing with customs and duties and VAT and GST and intermodal shipping. I mean, I'm dealing with 25 other things. And how and who said how much that's going to cost? And does the buyer already know that? And did we tell them? Did we have an API? I remember, a couple projects when I got here. It's been a few years, but one, do you remember the transformation management solutions company we did where we integrated like 45 different LTL carriers, plus the trucking companies could come in and you could literally go, I want to ship a piano from Austin to New York. And I could go in real time on the site we built, they could get 40 different quotes and have, all kinds of ideas exactly when they could have it shipped and how much it would cost, and have both private and public carriers. And we gave them all kinds of options and it was fully automated. That just blew my mind. And then I think there was one we did that was like Orange Octopus, right? That allowed and extended all those companies that I remember one was a tire company, and I could say, well, I need those 4 tires, but I want them shipped to London. But it was completely built in and it was seamless in the platform we built, where all of a sudden now VAT, customs, duties were included with the API that we automated, including all of the customs forms, the payment receipt. And I remember even the shipping labels. So when it showed up at the dock, the whole package of everything just came from our solution, already automated, already done, label ready to be printed, put on the pallet and shipped over to London, right?
That's right. Yeah. And that's perfect, because that's really what we want you as a listener to be thinking about is, what do you need? And open your mind, if you would, if you don't already know that there are opportunities to automate each of these steps, there probably are opportunities to do that. And there may be a incremental cost or a percentage cost with some of these resources, but it probably makes sense to at least evaluate them together with an expert, whether it's our Clarity team or another vendor that you work with. We strongly recommend that you explore where you want to go to be able to dominate and provide a lot of value in your space, to be the optimal vendor in your space for these auctions. And one of the best things that we can, kind of recommend, if we were to summarize this section, is open your mind up and raise your standards on what is possible, and really kind of demand, if you will, a full integration, or at least the ability to explore that, because most likely there are turnkey APIs available to be able to get you quotes and estimates that come back in real time and all automate the process for you, like you said, Ron, with customs and duties, and being in a position where we can allow the seller to actually use their own shipping provider. We can allow the buyer to use their own shipping provider. This is a common theme that we see with large equipment purchases. One of the things that we see a lot is with, like you said, Ron, estate sales or business sales. There may be a desire for the buyer to input their own shipping account information for the purchase of the shipping portion. So this is a really optimal option for a lot of buyers. So they may agree in the governance up front, hey, I want to pay for my own shipping. And this might make it optimal for the actual auction itself, for the seller in the auction. They might say, hey, I want everyone to agree that they're going to provide their own shipping account or their own shipping solution. So again, this is just kind of an example. For a scenario where it's expensive jewelry, we may need to physically have some kind of handoff that has a specialized delivery. Maybe it goes into like a bank security deposit vault. Maybe it goes to a armed vehicle even. Of course, these are kind of extreme scenarios, but the point is that it can be done. And this particular space, in the shipping side, the logistics side, and automating this, it's a burgeoning industry, and it's not going away. It's only going to continue to grow and continue to develop. And so we want to encourage you that you have the opportunity to fully optimize your processes, as specific as they may be to your niche. You really do have the opportunity to fully optimize those with the software that's available today.
Yeah. There's one more thing I want to talk about too that's kind of an interesting one is shipment containers. We've worked with numerous clients where they buy in bulk, right? And they might be government auctions, it might be estate sales, things like that, where they're buying and then reselling significantly. And so when they're buying from multiple auctions, they may want to have you hold items. Let's say you've got 17 different auctions, estate auctions running on a weekend. They may buy from all 17 of them, and they're trying to fill up a container because they're going to have that container put on a ship and shipped over to Europe. I know of one guy that does that with Sweden, and he always buys a full container because it costs the same to ship the container, so he might as well fill it up. And so he'll wait until he has a full container before it's shipped. So you'll want to have, and I'll try to include a screenshot or two of some of the solutions we've done with this, where we can actually, as they're buying, we can actually show how full the container is so that they know when to stop, right? So that's one of the things that, if that is a potential and you have a lot of international buyers and you might be dealing with container loads and volume, that might be something that you'll want to see. And I'll show you a screenshot or two here. But that is something, and we just call it a visualizer, right? And we can show the percentage of each container as it fills up. And then once it's full, then it can move to a new container, or they can say, done, go ahead and ship. I remember we even had one where we created a UI for Chrysler where part of their bumpers were part of the 5 mile per hour crash rating. And so one of the companies, we built the software where the company that drove around all the dealerships where the body work was being done, and if a bumper came in that had a crack in it, basically they had to confiscate them, take them back, and all the drivers would then come in, stick their PDA in a cradle, and then we integrated and pulled in all the barcode scans and all the things in there. And then we built this visualizer where each train car could hold up to 700 bumper covers, and then they would pull different lots in until they would fill up a train car, and then they would say, go ahead and ship, and then off it would go to Chrysler, and they would shred them. So there are a number of different ways for that visualization to be done. It could be for the buyer as they're buying. They keep buying until they filled up a train car, and then they know it can be shipped to them. Or it could be for you as you've got people that are buying in bulk internationally from you, and they buy, let's say they're buying thousands of items consistently, and one of your best buyers, where you can go and use the visualizer to pack the train cars before shipping, or the containers for shipping.
Here, here.
Any thoughts about that?
I mean, this can get really sophisticated because in addition to containers, we can do this for overnight shipments with packages that have dimensional weight as a constraint, and really trying to optimize for those. We can do it with, kind of looking at different shippers, and you can get dramatically different rates for different shippers that we want to compare against, like you were talking about with the 45 different shipping providers that we integrated to. And fundamentally, what we want you guys to take away from this video and just from this topic overall is that there really is a lot of depth and fidelity that you can get to be able to own your niche, and own your niche within, your auction space. Typically, it's going to mean that you're going to be an order of magnitude better in certain areas, especially around automation, and, several steps ahead at least of your competition. So, why not do that? And why not choose a partner who has the experience and the capability to be able to point these things out, be able to dig in with you and plan it out for the next 3 to 5 years. And ideally, who's going to be making these suggestions in advance for you and really helping you to kind of think ahead and stay ahead of your competition.
Yeah, I agree. So obviously here at Clarity, we've done this. We're really happy to be able to bring these topics to you and talk about it. Please feel free to give us more information and comment, and we'll be happy to do that. Like the video, stay tuned. We've got another one coming next week. And thanks, Chris. Another great video today.
Likewise. Thanks, Ron. And thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.
Bye for now.